My name is Naomi Calloway and I'm 34 years old. 9 years I spent working oil rig logistics in the Gulf, and the day I finally flew home to surprise my father, my own sister-in-law handed me a mop at my father's front door and said, "Kitchen's through there, the agency usually sends someone taller." My father, 71 years old, was in the garage. Not resting. Not reading the paper. Sleeping on a cot next to the water heater because his bedroom, the one I built for him, had been turned into a home office. What I found on that cot changed the next 9 hours of my life, and by midnight, my brother's wife was calling everyone she knew to say I'd ruined Thanksgiving before it even started. I hadn't ruined anything yet. I had a folder in my carry-on and an appointment at 4. Welcome to Hidden Chapters, where the quiet ones finally stop staying quiet. If you've ever come home to find out what silence actually cost you, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and subscribe, because you're going to want to see what was inside that folder. I need to take you back 9 years, to a kitchen table covered in hospital bills. My mother had died the year before, quick and cruel, a stroke on a Tuesday morning while she was watering the ferns. My father, Walter, fell apart in the specific way steady men fall apart, quietly, and all at once. He stopped fixing things. He stopped answering the phone. And somewhere in that fog, he co-signed a loan for my older brother Grant's failing hardware store, a loan Grant defaulted on 8 months later. My father, at 62, was suddenly staring down $81,000 of debt he never should have owed in the first place. I was 25, working logistics for an oil company, and a posting opened up in Doha. Triple the pay, tax-free, brutal hours. I remember standing in my father's driveway with the offer letter in my hand thinking, this is either running away or running toward him, and I won't know which for years. I took the job. I promised him 18 months. I stayed 9 years. Here's the part nobody posts about overseas work, the 12-hour shifts in 110-degree heat, missing my mother's first death anniversary because I was on a rig with no signal, watching my niece's birthday party through a laggy video call at 2 in the morning my time. I paid off the last of my father's debt in year 3 and cried in a stairwell for exactly the length of one flight, then went back to work. And then I did something that made the whole 9 years make sense. I opened an account I quietly called the Porch Fund, because my father always said the one thing he wanted before he died was a front porch with a swing, facing east, so he could watch the sun come up with his coffee. 2 years ago I bought him a house. A single-story craftsman with a wraparound porch, 40 minutes from where he'd rented his whole life. I put every cent of the porch fund into it, $230,000, closed the deal on a video call at 3 a.m. Doha time, and kept the deed in my name only, on the advice of our family lawyer, a sharp, careful woman named Priya Anand. Keep it protected, she told me. From anybody's creditors. Anybody's. We both knew who she meant, and neither of us said his name. My father cried the day he got the keys. He sat on that porch for an hour before he unpacked a single box. Now let me tell you about Grant, and I'll try to be fair, because for most of my life he deserved fairness. 40 years old, ran the hardware store into the ground through nobody's fault but bad luck and worse timing, then pivoted into flipping houses with his wife, Sabine. Sabine grew up the kind of poor that leaves a permanent flinch, evicted twice before she was 14, and she swore she'd never live like that again. I understand that fear. I just didn't know yet what she'd let it turn her into. 11 months ago, my father had a mild stroke. Small, survivable, but it left his right hand weak and his balance unreliable. Grant called me, warm and organized. We're moving him downstairs, no stairs with that balance, doctor's orders. It sounded exactly like something I would have suggested myself, which is what made it such a clean trap. 2 months later, my father's Sunday calls started coming from Grant's tablet instead of his own phone. Old phone finally died, Grant said. Cheaper to put him on our family plan. My father started looking thinner on those calls. Tired around the eyes. When I asked why, Grant would lean into frame and say, "Dad loves staying busy, you know him," and my father would smile the exact smile people give when there's someone standing just out of shot. I run logistics for a living. I read schedules, and I read people, and something in that smile did not add up. Here's the injustice that finally sent me to the airport, and I want to tell it to you exactly as it happened. 3 weeks ago, I called for my father's birthday, and Sabine answered his phone. "He's finishing up outside," she said, breezy, already turning away from the call. In the background I heard water running, a hose, the scrape of a bucket. "Finishing up what?" I asked. And Sabine laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Somebody's got to wash the good car before the open house Saturday. He doesn't mind, he likes staying useful." My 71-year-old father, 3 months post-stroke, was outside washing his son's car in the cold so it would show well for a house Grant and Sabine were flipping. Nobody had asked him. Nobody had thought to. I didn't say much on that call. I said happy things and hung up, and then I sat very still in my apartment in Doha and felt something in me go cold and clear the way it does right before you make a decision you can't take back. I had 3 weeks of banked leave. I told no one I was coming, not my father, and especially not Grant. I emailed Priya and confirmed the appointment we'd been circling for a year, the trust that would put the house permanently and irrevocably in my father's name for life, no matter what happened to me, no matter who tried to claim it after. 4 o'clock, Thursday. I printed everything and zipped it into my carry-on. Paper weighs almost nothing. It still holds a house up. 19 hours in the air. One sentence rehearsed the whole way, "Surprise, Dad." I never got to say it. The rideshare pulled up to my father's house at 10:40 a.m. and a car I didn't recognize sat in his driveway like it had grown roots. I rang my father's own doorbell like a delivery driver, exhausted, sunglasses on, bag over my shoulder. Sabine opened the door in workout clothes with a coffee in hand and looked me up and down the way you check produce for bruises. "Oh, you're here about the cleaning," she said, already stepping back to let me in. "Kitchen's through there. The agency usually sends someone taller." Then her phone rang, and she turned and walked off, leaving the door hanging open behind her like I was a draft. I stood on my own father's threshold for 2 full seconds, letting that sentence finish landing. Then I stepped inside like a stranger in a house I owned. New candles. New photos on the mantle, Grant and Sabine at a lake house, Sabine at a ribbon cutting for some flip. The space where my mother's photo used to hang held a printed sign that said "Live Simply." Upstairs, a television murmured to an empty room. And from the backyard came a sound I recognized before I could name it, the wet drag of a sponge on metal, over and over. I walked toward it with my heart doing something it hadn't done in years, and I already knew, the way you know bad news through a closed door, exactly who I'd find. My father was on his knees on a folded towel beside the driveway, soaping down a sedan that wasn't his weak hand curled awkwardly around the sponge, his balance braced against the bumper. He turned. For half a second I got the whole sunrise, his whole face lifting, my name breaking open in his mouth. Naomi. And then, just as fast, the light slammed shut. His eyes cut toward the house windows. Checking. He got up too fast, wincing, and gripped my arm. "You can't just show up, honey," he whispered. "They don't like surprises." They. My father, whispering in his own driveway. Before I tell you what was waiting for me on that cot by the water heater, tell me something in the comments. If you found your own father on his knees doing chores in the house you bought him, could you have stayed calm long enough to plan instead of just yelling? Because staying calm was the hardest thing I did all day. And if you're still here, hit subscribe, because the folder in my bag was about to change everything by nightfall. I asked him straight out why he was on his knees washing a car with a bad hand. He looked down at himself like he'd forgotten what he was doing. "It's for the open house," he said. "Keeps me busy." Keeps him busy. Where had I heard that exact phrase before? I asked to see his room, and that request turned into a walk through my own house like a crime scene. He led me not to the bedroom I'd had built with grab bars and the shower for exactly this reason, but past it, to the garage, to a cot wedged between a water heater and a shelf of paint cans, a card table beside it holding his pill organizer and a folded flannel shirt. Grant needed the extra bedroom for his home office, my father said, plain as a weather report. The flipping business, you know. Paperwork everywhere. My bedroom. The one with the walk-in shower and the grab bars. Turned into a desk and a filing cabinet, while my father slept on a camping cot with a weak right hand 12 feet from a water heater that could fail at any moment. On the fridge, held by a magnet, was a laminated sheet titled House Duties, in handwriting I didn't recognize. Walter, Trash Tuesday. Walter, wash cars before showings. Walter, water lawn daily. My father had a chore chart, laminated so it would last, in the house I'd bled 9 years overseas to give him. The garage door rumbled. My father's hand closed on my sleeve. That's Grant, honey, please be nice. My brother came in with grocery bags and froze for half a breath, and I watched him choose a face. He chose delighted. Big hug, big laugh, the whole porch light charm switched on at once. Why didn't you call? Sabine, look who's here. Sabine appeared in the hallway and, to her credit, recovered fast. You should have called ahead, I'd have made up the guest room. What guest room? I wanted to ask. The one my father sleeps beside a water heater in? At lunch, Sabine set 4 plates and 1 tray. Dad likes eating in the garage, it's quieter for him, she explained, to me, about my father, who was standing right there holding his own cane. I pulled out the chair beside mine. Sit with me, Dad. 3 seconds of total stillness at that table, like I'd pulled a fire alarm. Then he sat, hands folded in his lap like a boy called to the principal's office. Sabine's smile thinned to a wire. We have a rhythm here, Naomi. Everyone contributes. Contributes. In the house he doesn't own a single brick of. I excused myself after lunch, said I needed to run to the bank after the flight, and it was even true. On the counter by the door I'd noticed a stack of opened mail, my father's name showing through the plastic window on one. I took it with me. It was a credit statement. Walter Calloway. $4,100. Charges at a home decor boutique, 2 dinners priced like car payments, a spa. My father hasn't stepped into a spa in his life, and he'd sooner mend his own shirt than spend $40 on lunch. The signature on the receipts wasn't even a convincing forgery of his hand. At Priya's office at 4 o'clock, I laid it all out, the mail, the cot, the chore chart, and she went very still and very focused, the way good lawyers do when they smell something worse than they were told. We drafted the trust first, irrevocable, my father's right to live in that house for the rest of his life, untouchable by anyone, including me. Then a new will, replacing the old one I'd written at 26 with airport sentimentality, splitting everything between Grant and my father. The new one left everything to my father, and after him, to a scholarship fund in my mother's name. Grant's name appears nowhere in it. That isn't rage. That's accuracy. Then 3 letters, 1 each, revoking permission to occupy the property, effective that evening. And a repayment agreement for the $4,100, blank, waiting for a signature. People who leave on their own can't play the victim later, Priya said, sliding the folder back to me. What finally got you on a plane? I told her about the sponge, the driveway, the cold water on his bad hand. She took off her glasses. They had him washing cars. Technically, I said, he was making himself useful. Tonight, I intend to be extremely useful myself. Here's what I want you to hold on to while I set the table for what happened next. None of what I did that night was rage. It was 9 years of receipts finally cashing in. If somebody in your family is quietly living off a parent right now, comment the word deed if you're staying with me to the end, and subscribe, because the doorbell was about to ring on a dinner Sabine had no idea she was hosting. Sabine, it turned out, had invited neighbors over that same evening to celebrate the flip closing. An audience of 6, people from the cul-de-sac and her real estate office, gathered around my mother's old dining table, the one thing of hers Sabine hadn't yet redecorated. I watched them set it with cloth napkins and candles while my father, still in his work shirt, was handed an apron by Sabine and told, sweetly, wear this tonight, it'll be cute, the hard-working grandpa thing. My father's hand started to rise, 9 months of muscle memory, and I stepped in and took the apron first. "I've got this one, Dad." I tied it on myself. Sabine looked briefly confused, then satisfied, assuming the health problem had solved itself, never once asking why a woman who flew 19 hours volunteered for kitchen duty. Here's why. The one pouring the wine hears every conversation at that table. Invisible is the best seat in the house. Guests arrived at 6:30 sharp. Sabine gave the tour like a listing agent. We got in at the perfect time. Walter's actually staying with us, keeps him young, keeps him busy, practically family staff, and she laughed her rehearsed laugh, and 2 guests laughed with her. One older woman from the church my mother used to attend did not laugh. She looked at my father's stooped shoulders and said nothing, but she watched. Dinner went out. I poured water, I counted breaths, I said almost nothing, and Grant kept glancing at me across the table like a man who senses a shift change before he understands it. Halfway through the meal, he stood and dinged his glass with a fork. "To family," he announced, gathering the table with his eyes. "Real family shows up. Not the kind that chases money overseas and mails a check at Christmas." A small laugh from Sabine. My father's fork went still on his plate. I stood up. "I'd love to toast too," I said. "But first, one question." I reached into my bag and set the folder on the tablecloth beside the candles. The room did the thing rooms do when the temperature drops. "Since we're toasting this roof, Grant, whose name is on this house?" He scoffed. "It's Dad's house. Family house." Sabine's chin lifted. "What kind of question is that?" I slid the top page across the table until it stopped in front of my brother. "Warranty deed," I said. "Read the grantee line out loud." He was still smiling when he started reading. The smile died somewhere around the 3rd word. The color drained out of his face the way it drains from a patient 30 seconds before the monitor tells you what you already know. "Naomi Ray Calloway," he read, and a spoon rang against china somewhere down the table. I didn't raise my voice. If anything, I lowered it. "I bought this house 2 years ago. Every dollar. You've been living in your sister's house since the day you moved your desk into my bedroom." I laid down the second paper. "As of 4 o'clock this afternoon, it's in an irrevocable trust. Dad has the legal right to live here for the rest of his life. It cannot be sold, borrowed against, or inherited around. Not by you. Not by me." I laid down the third. "Permission to occupy this property is revoked, effective tonight." Sabine's chair scraped back. "This is our home." "No," I said, quieter than her by half. "It's the home my father has a right to live in, inside walls I own. You've been guests here. Guests who put an apron on a stroke survivor and called it cute." The churchwoman rose from her seat, walked around the table, and stood beside my father with a hand on his shoulder. One by one, the other guests followed her, quietly, until Sabine and Grant stood alone on their side of the table. Sabine came at me sharp and loud, about ingratitude, about everything they'd sacrificed. I let her finish. Then I set the credit card statement on the table next to the deed. $4,100, Sabine, charged in a signature that isn't his. The room went very quiet. Grant slammed his palm on the table, rattling the candles, and my father, for the first time all night, didn't flinch. "You were never here," Grant shouted. "I'm here now," I said. That's all I gave him. I laid out the choice, one option only that mattered. They were out by 9, they signed the repayment agreement, or Monday morning I walked the statements, the trust, and 6 witnesses into a police station and an eviction filing. Grant folded into his chair, hands over his face, and for one moment he was just my brother again, saying he couldn't stand losing the store and the house in the same year, that running this one was the only thing that still felt like winning. My father's hand lifted toward him, instinct older than any of us, and Grant knocked it away without looking, already turning to blame his wife. They left by 9. Suitcase wheels on the driveway, headlights sweeping the curtains once, gone. At 9:15, the locksmith I'd booked that afternoon handed me 2 new keys. My father and I carried his things, his real things, back into the bedroom with the grab bars, his and my mother's wedding photo onto the dresser where it belonged. He sat on the edge of his own bed, in his own room, and smoothed the quilt flat with his weak hand, careful, like he was afraid of wrinkling someone else's things. Then he remembered they were his, and that's when he finally let himself cry the good kind of tears, the kind a body allows itself once it's finished apologizing. 3 weeks later, here's where it landed. Grad works nights at a distribution center across town. The first repayment hit my father's account on the 1st of the month, on time. I don't need his apology. I need his autopay. My father's back on that porch every morning with his coffee, facing east, exactly like he wanted 9 years ago when this whole thing started. And I signed a new contract before I flew out, different rotation this time, more weeks home than away, because I finally understood what my mother used to tell me. You take care of people not with words, and honestly, not even with money, but with your name on the right papers and your voice steady on the one night it finally counts. That's the story. 1 flight home, 1 folder, and my father asleep in his own bed in the house that was always his. If this reminded you to check whose name is actually on the deed, or who's listed as your parents' emergency contact, go look this week. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one on Hidden Chapters.